Hello, I'm John David Ebert, and welcome to Understanding Contemporary Art. We're in the middle of a discussion here about the works of Christian Boltanski. And one of the things I would like to discuss as an intro to this section is Franz Borkenau's idea that he wrote in his book End and Beginning about a back and forth pendulation in the history of Western civilization between cultures that he called death-accepting cultures versus death-transcending cultures. The death-transcending cultures essentially begin with Egypt and Mesopotamia, which are cultures that refuse to accept death. And because they refused to accept it, they monumentalized it. They created ladders to heaven and a grand funerary culture. And then when it came time for the Greeks and the Hebrews to come on stage, they become a death-accepting culture. This is forecast and foreshadowed by Akhenaten, his revolt in about 1380 or so BC, and his war on the funerary deities of the astral plane. That is a foreshadowing of the coming of these death-accepting cultures. The Hebrews weren't much interested in the afterlife. It just becomes the realm of Sheol into which the dead are tossed, and neither really much were the Greeks. It isn't until the Christians come along that the pendulation swings back, and with the Christians we begin to get the beginnings now, once again, or the retrieval once again of a death-transcending culture in which the soul's salvation becomes the primary thing, and we begin to get accounts in patristic literature of the soul's ascent through the silvery effulgence of the afterlife, the luminous heavens. The underworld has more being for the Christians than it did for the Greeks or the Hebrews. But along comes the Renaissance, and with the Renaissance recaptures the Greek attitude of death acceptance, and there's a turning away from the afterlife once again toward more earthly pragmatic concerns, which brings us down to our contemporary cycle of civilization where we're at now, which Borkenau says has gone so far that it is now essentially a death-denying culture. The afterlife is denied, the soul's existence is denied. All of that is denied, which Borkenau says is a first as far as he is concerned. So I think with the work of Christian Boltanski, we can see that there's an attempt to sort of reconnect to the cultures of the death-transcending attitude that have an accepting attitude toward death and the underworld. If we look back at some of his works here, I want to finish off the discussion with just a few more of these. This is his 1996 work, The Concessions, in which we can see the dead they look like phantoms, like the sort of two-dimensional shades that Odysseus encounters in the underworld when he goes down below the underworld. And the images on the back here are essentially images of deformities that are captured, that have been covered up with these black cloths, which remind one of the custom of when somebody dies in a house, the mirror is reversed so that one does not encounter the dead person in the mirror. Boltanski has said that each one of us is surrounded by a cloud of dead ancestors. You know, when you look back through the works when you look back through genealogical books and records of the ancestors, you can sort of see this ancestor has that person's eye, this one has that person's nose, this one inherited that person's lip. It's almost as though the dead were this diffuse cloud of possibilities and potentialities that each one of us inherits and actualizes in time and space. And here I think with his reliquary, he's represented these individuals in a sort of ghostly kind of way in which they look very much like they sort of lack being there-ness, and they look like anonymous individualities. He did a series of shadow theaters in the early 80s. This is 1984, which casts essentially the shadows of the dead on the walls here, which recaptures Plato's myth of the cave. We've already said in the Kiefer lecture that Plato essentially junked the realm of becoming, but I think he also junked the realm of the dead and the realm of the cave. He dismisses the cave as he identifies it with the realm of becoming and essentially dismisses it, but the cave is the earliest realm of habitation for the dead that we know. It goes all the way back to Atapuerca, Spain, circa 400,000 BC, when Proto-Neanderthals named Homo heidelbergensis were throwing their dead randomly into chasms beneath the floor. And that tradition continues all the way down to Shanidar, Shanidar dates from about 60,000 BC, where the Neanderthals are still burying the dead in caves. And that continues all the way down through the Old Testament in about the same region where Abraham buys his cave to be buried in from the Hittites in that same region. And we think of Lazarus being resurrected. He's always shown coming out of a cave. So the Hebrews are still burying their dead in caves all the way down through the Old Testament. So the Cavern World is associated in a very archaic way with the realm of the dead. This work is Menschlich of 1994. It invites a certain comparison with Gerhard Richter's work, 48 Portraits. Only here we do have a true collective assemblage of enunciation in which we have a realm of dead, anonymous individualities. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they've come from. They simply are Boltanski's photos of people that he's collected over the years from various scraps and albums, and as he has found them, and represented this assemblage of dead ancestors. Some of these people were dead at the time of the exhibition, some not, and we don't know, it's impossible to know. But it's a mysterious, who are these people? It makes you wonder, who are they? Where do they come from? Where do they go to? What happened? What is the fate of each one of them? There's a haunting aspect to it, I think. This is the missing house from 1991. Boltanski is always concerned with memorializing those who are no longer with us. There's always a concern with capturing the missing and bringing them back into the present. There was a house here that was bombed in between two houses during World War II, and he has put a series of placards with the names on some of the people who died in the bombed house. This image here gives us a close-up of the house. We can see, or of the names that he has put on the house, these little one-dimensional inscriptions that are all that remains of the traces of these individuals who have disappeared in the bombing run. And we've already remarked on his concern with archives. This is the Reserve of the Dead Swiss, 1991. We've already remarked on the significance of the archive for the underworld, where the names, all the names of the dead are stored. And of course, that phrase, all the names, does suggest that one of the novels of one of my favorite writers, Jose Saramago, his book, All the Names, in which he has a clerk who's working in a reserve office one day, a census office, and he drops a card with the name of an anonymous individual on it that just happens to fall to the ground, and he picks up the card and he reads the name, and he wonders who this person is. And the rest of the novel is about his obsession with finding out the identity of this person whose status has been reduced to a mere iteration, a mere mark on a card. And we do indeed find out the fate of that individual, but it leaves one pause to think about the fate of the individual in the age of archives and bureaus that flatten individuals out into mere traces. This is another one of his archives. This is The Lost Workers of Halifax. Boltanski has said that he's always at his most comfortable in basements and in cellars, and he likes to do installations and exhibitions in underworld. So he's very closely tied to the Cavern World and is very comfortable with it, I think. And this is the last work that I want to show in this series. This is The Subscribers, which is a work that he did from 2000, in which he gathered up all the names. Basically what he's done is to gather up all the telephone books of all the countries of the world, and he's trying to put them into a single installation, which at first sight might seem a bit meaningless until we begin to think about the eschatological overtones of this. And this brings us back full circle, I think, in the Boltanski discussion from where we started. This might be the list of all the names that's called out at the end of the world, when at the Last Judgment Gabriel's horn resounds. When that horn resounds, all the names of all the living, as well as all the dead, will be called out, and that will begin the sorting process of sorting out the blessed, who will be sorted out from the damned, and the negentropic process of reversing death into this sort of difference engine, this sort of hot and cold difference engine of the blessed and the damned, with Christ basically in the role of a sort of Maxwellian demon who is reversing entropy there at the end of time. And I think there's some of that in this. There is a kind of eschatological note about collecting all the world's names of all the world's living and putting it into a kind of an archive here. And so that's essentially Christian Boltanski in a nutshell. That captures, I think, the essence of his work, his sense with the past and of memorializing those who are missing, those who are no longer with us, those with whom he wishes to memorialize and recapture.